She saw the frozen abyss open, the silence in her throat more cutting than the glacial wind. Anya, the Yakutian elder, watched her granddaughter Lyra, a tiny speck of life, surrounded by 7 colossal polar bears, each weighing over 1,000 kilograms, emerging from the 70-degree Celsius blizzard like hungry ghosts. The ice beneath her feet cracked, an omen of imminent death. Anya tried to scream a warning, but only icy air escaped, a frozen scream no one would ever hear. And what she would do in her silent despair would decide the fate of her entire tribe. Anya felt the cold pierce her bones, but a more intense flame, that of love for Lyra, burned in her chest. Time was an enemy as relentless as the blizzard. There were no seconds to lose. Her eyes, once tearful with helplessness, hardened with the resolve of 1,000 winters. She could not scream, but she could run. And she would run with the strength of all the Yakutian generations who defied death in those icy lands. With an effort that seemed to tear her soul out, Anya propelled herself forward. Every step was a battle against the deep snow, an icy embrace that tried to trap her. The wind howled, a ghostly chorus that seemed to mock her muteness, whipping her aged face and making breathing an icy agony. But she did not stop. The image of Lyra, small and fragile, herding the Yakutian horses, was her beacon in the white darkness. 20 horses, each weighing over 700 kilograms, resilient yet vulnerable before the white monsters. Lyra, unaware of her grandmother's desperate race, tried to keep the horses grouped. Her gloved fingers tightened on the makeshift reins, while the ice beneath her feet cracked alarmingly. She did not yet see the bears, her vision limited by the curtain of snow and the vast white immensity. She felt the cutting cold and the animals' unease, which snorted clouds of steam, their eyes rolling with a primal premonition. The horses, accustomed to the harshness of Yakutia, sensed the predators before they saw them. The 7 polar bears, creatures of legend and nightmare, moved with deceptive slowness. Their gigantic bodies, over 1,000 kilograms, emerged from the storm, ghostly silhouettes of destruction. Their keen sense of smell had detected the warmth and scent of the herd. Hunger, an ancestral force, propelled them. They advanced, their heavy steps breaking the thin ice into cracks, a sound that for Anya echoed like war drums in her heart. Anya felt the icy air burn her lungs. Her legs, though strong from a lifetime of challenges, began to fail. The trauma that had stolen her voice seemed a double burden, an invisible shackle that prevented her from warning. But the wisdom of her ancestors, the resilience forged in centuries of cruel winters, was her guide. She knew that brute force would not be enough. She needed cunning, a plan that would speak louder than a scream. She focused on the distance, calculating the time, the bear's speed, Lyra's and the horse's vulnerability. Every fiber of her being cried out for speed, for a way to bridge the abyss between her and her granddaughter. The fate of the entire village, the hope for a future, depended on that herd, that girl, and her own ability to overcome the impossible. Her eyes, fixed on the horizon, reflected the frozen fury of her ancestors, a silent promise that she would not give up. The silent race against death had only just begun, and Anya, the mute elder, was determined to win. Anya felt her heart pounding in her chest, a frantic rhythm that seemed to echo the icy, relentless howl of the wind. Every gust of frozen air burned her nostrils and lungs, a searing pain that added to her growing exhaustion. The snow, once a barrier, now seemed a sea of heavy cotton sucking the energy from her legs, but she could not stop. Lyra, the horses, the village. These silent words were the mantra that propelled her forward, an invisible fire that warmed her soul against the deadly cold of Yakutia. Her eyes, accustomed to deciphering the secrets of the tundra, scanned the white landscape for any advantage. Ancestral wisdom whispered in her mind, reminding her that nature, however relentless, always offered valuable clues. She had no voice to scream, but she had a sharp mind and a body trained by decades of survival. She needed something, anything, that she could use against the white giants. Lyra, in turn, felt panic begin to tighten its grip on her chest. The Yakutian horses, normally so calm and robust, were growing increasingly agitated. Their heavy hooves pounded on the ice, and the sound of cracks became more frequent and frightening. One of the oldest horses, a stallion with a thick mane and experienced gaze, reared up suddenly, neighing a guttural warning that was muffled by the storm. Lyra held on tightly, her small body trembling not just from the cold, but from a fear she had never felt before. Something was wrong, very wrong. The polar bears, in turn, were closer. Their massive silhouettes were now discernible through the snow, white forms moving with relentless determination. The scent of the horses, an aroma of life and warmth, was an irresistible invitation to the hunger that propelled them. One of them, the largest and most imposing, raised its head, sniffing the air with a low growl, almost inaudible beneath the wind, but carrying the promise of destruction. Its small, dark eyes gleamed with cold intelligence and insatiable hunger. Anya saw the stallion rear up. A pang of despair struck her. Lyra was in imminent danger. She redoubled her effort, her muscles burning, the thin air making every breath difficult. The ice beneath her own feet began to give way in small cracks, reminding her of the fragility of the surface that separated her from the icy abyss. With every step, she felt the urgency grow, the need to act, to find a solution. Suddenly, an insight. Anya remembered an ancient story told by her own grandmother about how the Yakuts dealt with predators in extreme conditions. It wasn't about confronting force with more force, but about understanding the animal's mind, exploiting its instincts. Her eyes fixed on a distant rock formation, partially covered by snow, that stretched out like a bony arm in the white vastness. It could be a chance. A small hope ignited in her heart, a spark of cunning amidst the despair. She slightly changed her route, heading towards the rock formation. The terrain was more uneven there, but it offered cover and a subtle elevation. Her gestures, though silent, were filled with unwavering purpose. She needed to attract the bears, separate them, or perhaps, just perhaps, create a distraction that would give Lyra and the horses a chance to escape. Anya's mind worked feverishly, combining the wisdom of her ancestors with acute observation of the present. The silent race continued, but now there was a plan, a strategy forged in the heart of the Yakutian winter, ready to be executed. The fate of everyone depended on her courage, her intelligence, and the unwavering strength of her love. Anya, driven by this silent truth, quickened her pace towards the rock formation. Every fiber of her aged body cried out for rest, but the sight of Lyra, small and vulnerable, was an invisible whip that propelled her. The icy wind tried to blind her, whipping snow into her face, but her eyes, narrowed and focused, did not lose sight of her goal. The rock, dark and ancient, promised a chance, a foothold in the deadly dance. She knew that the bears, with their colossal mass of over 1,000 kilograms each, would be slow on uneven terrain, and the rock would offer a natural barrier, a labyrinth of stones and crevices that could be used to her advantage. Lyra, meanwhile, felt terror freeze her veins. The oldest stallion's neigh had been a warning cry she could not ignore. Through the curtain of snow, the white and gigantic silhouettes of the polar bears were now unmistakable. 7 monsters, emerging from the white hell, moved with a palpable hunger. Lyra tried to pull the reins, but the Yakutian horses, in their instinctive panic, began to scatter. 20 horses, each weighing over 700 kilograms, which once seemed a fortress, were now frightened prey, their heavy hooves cracking the ice beneath their feet with alarming frequency. Lyra screamed, her thin, fragile voice almost inaudible in the wind's howl, a scream of despair for help that she knew no one would hear. The polar bears, sensing the hesitation and panic in the herd, accelerated their advance. The largest of them, an imposing male with ancient scars, let out a deep growl that made the air vibrate, a primal hunting sound that cut through the storm. Its heavy steps made the earth tremble, and the ice beneath them broke into large plates, revealing the darkness of the icy water below. They did not see Anya, their attention fixed on the feast of meat and warmth that the horses represented. Hunger was a fire that propelled them, an unstoppable force in the frozen vastness of Yakutia, a primordial and relentless instinct. Anya finally reached the base of the rock formation. Without losing a second, she began to climb the lower rocks, seeking an elevated position. Her gloved fingers clung to the icy crevices, her feet finding purchase on treacherous ledges. The wind tried to knock her down, but she clung with the tenacity of an ancient root. From her new vantage point, she could see Lyra, almost lost among the panicked horses, and the bears, now dangerously close. With a quick glance, Anya identified a narrow, deep crevice in the rock, stretching for a few meters. An audacious idea forged in generations of experience began to take shape in her mind. She needed to attract the predator's attention, but in a way that would not put Lyra at risk. With firm and calculated gestures, Anya began to gather loose stones and dry branches, preparing her first silent maneuver against the white giants. Hope, once a spark, now burned with renewed intensity, guiding her hands and heart amidst the desolation. Anya, with a clear mind despite her exhaustion, chose a handful of heavier stones and some dry, brittle branches. She stacked them carefully, seeking the perfect balance. The narrow, deep crevice in the rock was her ally, a natural channel to amplify her ruse. With a quick and silent movement, worthy of an experienced hunter, she pushed the pile into the crevice. The stones and branches rolled and bounced with a surprising crash, echoing through the ice and rock walls like distant thunder, breaking the monotonous howl of the storm. It was not a scream, but a potent warning, an abrupt call to the predators. Two of the polar bears, those furthest ahead and closest to the rock formation, stopped abruptly, their massive heads turned towards the sound, their small dark eyes blinking with predatory curiosity. They growled, a deep, guttural sound from the depths of the frozen earth, and slightly changed their route, moving towards the crevice. Hunger propelled them, but the hunting instinct for new and unexpected prey was equally powerful. The other 5 bears continued their relentless advance towards the horses, but the group's formation broke, creating a small but crucial disorganization. Lyra, almost blinded by snow and panic, heard the unusual crash. Her eyes rose in time to see the 2 closest bears deviate, their gigantic bodies seeming to hesitate, confused by the sudden interruption. A flash of hope ignited in her heart, a faint flame against the overwhelming cold. She did not know what had happened, nor where the sound had come from, but the distraction was real and offered a crucial pause. The Yakutian horses, though still agitated, seemed to have sensed the change in the predator's pressure. The oldest stallion, which had previously reared in despair, now pounded his hooves on the ice with new urgency, ready to move, to lead the herd away. Lyra gripped the reins with renewed strength, her numb fingers barely feeling the leather, her eyes scanning the landscape for an exit, a safe direction to guide the animals. The ice beneath her feet continued to crack into threatening fissures, but the immediate threat of the 7 bears seemed to have diminished for an instant, a precious respite in the race against death. Anya observed the scene with a mix of relief and renewed determination. Her plan had worked in part, buying valuable time that could be the difference between life and death. 2 bears were distracted, but 5 still advanced, and danger was imminent. She could not afford to stop. She needed more, an even bolder strategy forged in the wisdom of her ancestors. With a quick glance, She noticed a higher ledge on the rock, which would offer a better view and an opportunity for a more impactful maneuver. With a monumental effort, she began to climb again, her aching muscles protesting with every movement, every fiber of her body crying out for rest. The wind howled, trying to drag her into the frozen abyss, but the image of Lyra and the horses was her shield, her unwavering strength. She knew that cunning was her only weapon against the brute force of the giants, and she would not hesitate to use it until her last breath. The fate of her family and the entire village was in her hands, and Anya, the mute elder, was ready for another act of silent heroism. With an icy sigh, she propelled her tired body onto the higher ledge. Every muscle protested, a sharp pain shooting through her legs and arms, but the urgency in her heart overcame the exhaustion. Her gloved hands, calloused by decades of work on the tundra, sought firm support in icy crevices. The wind, a constant enemy, whipped her clothes, trying to knock her down. Her eyes, however, fixed on Lyra, who was bravely trying to regroup the horses. The sight of her granddaughter, small and valiant, ignited her resilience, an inextinguishable flame in the deadly cold of Yakutia. From above, Anya's perspective was wider and more terrifying. She saw the two distracted bears sniffing the crevice with curiosity, their growls almost inaudible. But the other five, more dangerous, were rapidly approaching Lyra and the herd. The ice beneath hooves and paws cracked and groaned, a sinister sound that announced imminent collapse. Lyra, her face red from the cold, pulled the reins hard, guiding the oldest stallion away from the thin ice. The girl, despite her fear, showed determination, filling Anya with pride and a silent despair. Anya's mind worked as fast as the wind. She needed something that would not only distract, but decisively drive away the predators. Her eyes scanned the snow and ice, seeking a new opportunity. She noticed an area of soft, deep snow, accumulated in a depression beneath the steep edge of the rock. A bold, almost desperate idea emerged. It was a risk, but Yakutia had taught that the greatest risk was not taking a risk when life was at stake. With quick gestures, Anya released large blocks of snow and ice from the ledge. She pushed them with her feet and arms, with all her strength. The blocks fell with a dull thud in the soft snow, but the goal was not the sound, it was the vibration. The snow, in large quantities, began to slide, creating a small artificial avalanche that moved slowly but with increasing force towards the five bears. It was not devastating, but it created a visual and auditory barrier, an unexpected obstacle that would disorient the giants for moments. The five bears, a few meters from Lyra and the horses, felt the tremor. Their heads rose in alert, eyes fixed on the moving white mass. They growled, confused and irritated, their hunting instincts overcome by caution. The avalanche, though small, interrupted the hunt, an unknown threat that made them hesitate. Some retreated, others tried to go around, losing precious time and their initial advantage. Lyra, who had moved the horses to more stable ice, turned when she felt the tremor and saw the snow slide. She did not understand the origin, but she saw the bears stop, their brutal charge interrupted. Relief and confusion flooded her. She looked at the rock, feeling a presence, an invisible guide. Anya, from above, watched with a heavy heart, knowing that Lyra's life and the village's future were being rewritten in ice and snow. The plan was working, but the fight was far from over. The mute elder, her face marked by determination, prepared for the next move, her gaze carrying the frozen fury of her ancestors and the promise of victory. Anya, the mute elder, felt determination harden in her eyes, a silent promise that she would not yield to despair. From the top of the ledge, she observed the five remaining bears, still agitated by the small avalanche, but already regaining focus on the herd. They were cunning, and the previous distraction would not be enough to deter them for long. Lyra and the horses needed more, an act that spoke directly to the predator's primal instincts. Yakutia had taught that sometimes the best defense was the purest audacity. With a bold and dangerous plan forming in her mind, Anya moved cautiously along the edge of the rock, looking for a more exposed point. Her gloved fingers felt the icy stone, seeking support, while the wind tried to tear her from her precarious refuge. She untied the heavy fur shawl that protected her from the cold, a precious item, but now a tool. Holding it firmly, she raised it above her head, swinging it with all the strength she had left. The dark fabric, contrasting with the white snow, created an abrupt and unexpected movement, a focal point that screamed presence in the monotonous vastness. The 5 bears who were about to resume the chase turned their massive heads in unison. Their small, dark eyes, previously fixed on the horses, now turned to the solitary figure on the rock. A deep, collective growl echoed, more a sound of irritation than fear. That movement, that audacity, was a direct challenge. The hunt, which seemed so certain, was constantly being interrupted by an unknown and persistent source. 2 of the bears, the youngest and most impulsive, changed direction, moving towards the rock, drawn by Anya's provocation. Lyra, who had managed to regroup the horses on a safer stretch of ice, watched the scene unfold. Through the snow, she distinguished the silhouette of her grandmother, the shawl waving like a flag of defiance. A mix of terror and admiration flooded her. Her grandmother, mute and aged, was there, facing the monsters to protect her. Tears froze on her eyelids, but a new wave of courage propelled her. She tightened the reins, ready to seize any opportunity Anya might create. The oldest stallion snorted, its eyes fixed on the bears. But now there was a direction, a hope. Anya felt adrenaline rush through her veins. The plan was working, drawing the bears away from Lyra. But as she took a step back to swing the shawl with more force, the ice beneath her left foot gave way abruptly and violently. It wasn't a crack, but a total collapse. A silent scream escaped her throat as her body lost balance. She tried to cling to the rock, but her gloved hands slipped on the smooth, icy surface. With a dull thud, Anya fell, her body rolling down a small slope of snow and ice, stopping abruptly in a deep and narrow crevice. Sharp pain pierced her knee, and an inaudible groan escaped her lips. Trapped, vulnerable, and with searing pain, Anya looked up. The 2 bears approaching the rock stopped, their growls intensifying, their eyes fixed on the newly fallen prey. The turning point had arrived, and the mute elder, now wounded and immobilized, faced an even greater danger, but her determination did not waver. The sharp pain in Anya's knee was an icy fire, a betrayal by her own body that left her trapped and vulnerable. The impact of the fall reverberated through her bones, but her mind, sharp as an ice blade, refused to yield to panic. Her eyes, which had witnessed so many winters and dangers, fixed on the 2 approaching bears, their imposing silhouettes growing with each step. They were the personification of hunger, and she, wounded, seemed easy prey, an unexpected feast in the heart of the storm. An inaudible groan escaped her lips, not from physical pain, but from the suffocating anguish of being immobilized when Lyra was still in danger, with the other 5 giants lurking. The crevice, which once seemed a strategic refuge, was now a cruel trap. The ice and rock walls were smooth and unforgiving, and her injured knee prevented any attempt to climb, every movement a torment. But Anya was not a woman to give up. Never. The wisdom of her ancestors whispered in her heart, a silent melody of resilience, reminding her that cunning was the most potent weapon, even against colossal brute force. She needed a plan, fast, before the bears arrived and sealed her fate. Her eyes scanned the interior of the crevice with the speed of a falcon. It was narrow, deep, and the wind howled through it, creating a strange sound, almost a ghostly lament. Suddenly she noticed something, small, loose fragments of ice and snow caught in the rock crevices above her. Like sharp teeth, an audacious, almost insane idea began to take shape in her exhausted but brilliant mind. As the two bears approached, their growls becoming clearer, guttural and more threatening, Anya, with a tremendous effort that made her body tremble, extended her good arm. Her gloved fingers, despite the searing pain radiating from her knee, felt the icy surface above her, seeking the loose fragments. She could not scream, but she could make the ice speak, could transform it into a voice of defiance. With slow but deliberate and firm movements, she began to scrape and push the ice and snow from the crevices, directing them downwards. A shower of ice and snow, like an unexpected hail, fell on the two bears that were a few meters from the crevice. It was not an avalanche, but an annoying and unexpected bombardment of icy particles that hit their snouts and eyes. The bears stopped abruptly, shaking their gigantic heads, their growls turning into snorts of irritation and confusion. They did not expect that the fallen and seemingly defenseless prey could still react with such audacity. Predatory curiosity mingled with a hint of caution, a sign that something was not as expected. Lyra, in turn, felt a new tremor in the ice and a strange sound coming from the rock. She had managed to guide the horses to a safer stretch where the snow was thicker and the ice less treacherous, but panic was still present in her chest. The 5 remaining bears, though disorganized by the previous small avalanche, were still an imminent threat, their eyes fixed on the herd. She looked at the rock, searching for her grandmother, and saw the 2 bears stopped, agitated, near the crevice. What was happening? Confusion was a veil, but the predator's pause was a blessing, a vital respite. With renewed determination, Lyra decided she could not wait. Her grandmother had given her a chance, and she needed to seize it with all her courage. She tightened the reins with force, and with a cry muffled by the wind, propelled the oldest stallion forward, trying to guide the herd away from the rock, towards an area of tundra that seemed more stable and covered by deeper snow, away from the treacherous ice and the predators. The horses, sensing the firm leadership, began to move, their heavy hooves kicking up clouds of snow that obscured their trail. Anya watched Lyra move away with the horses, each step of her granddaughter a balm for her soul. A deep relief, almost painful in its intensity, flooded her. Her plan was working, even with her wounded and trapped. The 2 bears, still irritated by the falling ice, began to sniff the crevice more intensely, their large heads dangerously approaching the edge. They were confused, but hunger was still a powerful engine, a force that would not be easily deterred. Anya knew that the ice trick would not deter them forever. She needed something more, something that would make them retreat decisively, convincing them that she was not easy prey, even in her vulnerable condition. Her good hand slid to her belt, where she kept a small, polished mammoth bone amulet, a gift from her own grandmother, laden with stories and strength. It was not a weapon in the physical sense, but a powerful symbol of her lineage, her inner strength, her connection to the land and her ancestors. With a defiant gaze, carrying the frozen fury of her ancestors, Anya raised the amulet above her head, not to scare, but to assert her presence, her unwavering resilience, her Yakutian soul. The bears, sensing the energy of that imposing figure, stopped for an instant, their growls diminishing to a cautious murmur, a primordial hesitation. The mute elder, trapped and wounded, faced death with the dignity of her ancestors, ready for the next act of her silent battle, her heart beating with the strength of 1,000 winters. Anya, the mute elder, raised the mammoth bone amulet, and the gesture by itself carried the strength of 1,000 winters. It was not a scream, but a silent declaration, an ancestral challenge that reverberated in the icy air. The 2 bears, a few meters from the crevice, stopped. Their growls diminished to a cautious murmur. Their small, dark eyes, accustomed to dominating, now reflected a hint of uncertainty. The wounded and trapped figure in the crevice did not cower. On the contrary, she exuded an aura of power they did not understand. Hunger propelled them, but the instinct of self-preservation, forged in centuries of survival in the merciless tundra, made them hesitate. The searing pain in Anya's knee was a cruel reminder of her vulnerability, but she ignored it. Her mind was clear, her heart a drum of determination. She could not move, but she could fight with her gaze, with her presence. The amulet, a tangible link to her ancestors, seemed to pulse in her hand. She held it high, her eyes fixed on the predators, transmitting an unwavering message. Do not underestimate me. I am Yakutia. I am the protecting force. The bears, confused, began to circle the crevice, their heavy paws crushing the snow. They lowered their heads, sniffing the air, trying to decipher the strange energy that emanated from the elder. One of them, the largest, ventured to peer into the crevice, its wet, warm snout mere centimeters from Anya's face. She did not recoil. Her eyes met its, and for an instant time seemed to stop. In that gaze the bear saw not easy prey, but the frozen fury of an entire lineage, the resilience of a people who defied death every winter. Meanwhile, Lyra, her heart pounding, guided the horses. The oldest stallion, sensing the girl's urgency, ran with surprising speed, its hooves kicking up clouds of snow. The other horses followed, a frightened but united herd. Lyra looked back at the distant rock where the silhouette of her grandmother was just a dot. She did not know what Anya was doing, but she knew her grandmother was fighting, buying her time. Tears froze on her cheeks, but they were not of despair, but of a mix of fear and deep gratitude. The 5 remaining bears, who had been temporarily disorganized by the small avalanche, now regrouped. They were further from Lyra, but still represented an imminent threat. Their heavy steps echoed across the tundra, a symphony of danger. Lyra knew she had to continue, that every meter was a victory. She tightened the reins, propelling the horses forward, seeking a refuge, a place where they could be safe. Back in the crevice, Anya felt the bear's warm breath on her face. It was a moment of primal terror, but she refused to yield. With a slow and deliberate movement, she used her good hand to scrape more ice and snow from the crevice wall, letting them fall noisily onto the bear's head. It was not an attack, but a calculated irritation, a way to break the predator's concentration. The bear recoiled, shaking its head, its growls intensifying in frustration. Anya knew she needed more. She could not afford to be a passive distraction. With a strength that came from somewhere deep within her, she began to strike the bone amulet against the icy wall of the crevice. The sound, though muffled by the snow and wind, was sharp and repetitive, a rhythmic hammering that reverberated through the rock structure. It was an unnatural sound in the silent vastness of the tundra, a sound that did not belong to the hunt, a sound that broke the spell of the chase. The 2 bears looked at each other, their eyes expressing growing confusion. The wounded prey was making noise, an annoying and persistent noise coming from a hard-to-reach place. They could not simply grab her. The situation was strange, dangerous in a way they were not accustomed to. The hunting instinct, though strong, began to be overcome by caution. The energy spent dealing with this peculiar prey could be better employed elsewhere. With a final growl of frustration, the largest bear turned away. The other followed. They did not move away completely, but moved to a safer distance, watching the crevice with suspicion, their gigantic silhouettes becoming more distant in the blizzard. Anya watched them go, feeling a relief that almost made her faint. The pain in her knee returned with full force, but she had succeeded. She had driven away the first 2, her gaze turned to the direction Lyra had gone. The blizzard was still relentless, and the other 5 bears were still out there. The battle was far from over, but a small victory had been won. With the amulet still clutched in her hand, Anya closed her eyes for a brief instant, seeking strength, preparing for the next challenge. Yakutia demanded resilience, and she, the mute elder, was ready to pay the price. Anya, the mute elder, felt the cold of the crevice penetrate her bones, but the pain in her knee was a more urgent reminder of her situation. The two bears, though distant, were still a vigilant threat, their dark silhouettes against the snow. She knew she could not stay there waiting. Lyra and the horses needed her, and the other 5 giants were still lurking, a hungry shadow in the white vastness. Her gaze swept the crevice walls again, seeking an exit, a hope. The walls were smooth, almost vertical, and the ice made them even more treacherous. Every attempt to move her injured knee sent waves of agonizing pain, but the image of Lyra, small and brave, propelled her. Ancestral wisdom whispered in her mind, reminding her that Yakutia always offered a chance, however small, to those who refused to give up. Meanwhile, Lyra fought against the wind and snow. The oldest stallion, with its strength and experience, guided the herd, but the horses were exhausted, their heavy hooves sinking into the deep snow. Lyra looked back at the rock where her grandmother was. The distance increased, and the blizzard obscured her vision, but she felt Anya's presence, a silent force that guided her. The 5 remaining bears had not given up. They moved in a semicircle, trying to encircle the herd, their massive bodies almost invisible in the storm. Lyra tightened the reins, her heart pounding like a drum. She needed to find a safe place, a refuge for the horses, before the predators reached them. Her eyes searched for an elevation, an area with trees or rocks that could offer some protection. Back in the crevice, Anya realized that the wall opposite her position had a small rock formation, almost a step, covered by a thicker layer of snow. It was a huge risk, but perhaps it was her only chance. With an inaudible groan, she began to drag herself, using her arms to pull her body, ignoring the searing pain in her knee. Every inch was a battle, every movement a sacrifice. She clung to every small ledge, every crevice, her gloved fingers seeking purchase on the icy rock. The 2 bears, who had been watching her from a distance, noticed her movement. Their growls returned, louder, more curious. They began to approach again, drawn by the vulnerability of the wounded prey. Lyra, feeling the danger intensify, spotted a small rocky hill covered with dwarf pines, which would offer a natural barrier. It was far, but the only hope. She cried out to the horses, her voice almost swallowed by the wind, propelling them with all her courage. The horses, exhausted, but sensing the urgency, redoubled their efforts. The 5 bears, noticing the maneuver, quickened their pace, turning into white blurs in the blizzard. The race was a matter of life or death, every breath a challenge, every step a silent prayer. Lyra felt the ice beneath the horses' hooves groan dangerously. They were approaching an area of thinner ice, a new danger. Anya, finally reaching the small rocky step, felt a thread of hope. With a supreme effort, she managed to push herself up, supporting her good knee and dragging the injured one. She was almost out of the crevice, but the 2 bears were now a few meters away, their warm, heavy breaths almost audible. She needed one last distraction, something that would definitively drive them away. Her eyes fixed on a pile of loose stones at the top of the crevice, a gift from Yakutia. With a quick and desperate gesture, she pushed the stones, which fell with a crash into the crevice, creating a deafening noise and a whirlwind of snow and ice. The bears retreated abruptly, startled by the unexpected sound and the cloud of debris. It was the moment. Anya, with the pain burning in her knee, but her determination unwavering, managed to drag herself out of the crevice, exhausted, but free. She was back on the surface. But the battle was not yet over, and Lyra was still in danger. The mute elder, her heart ablaze, looked in her granddaughter's direction, preparing for the next act of her silent heroism. Anya, the mute elder, her heart ablaze, looked in her granddaughter's direction, preparing for the next act of her silent heroism. The excruciating pain in her knee prevented her from standing, but her mind, clear and focused, already charted the path. She could not run, but she could crawl, she could drag herself, she could use every ounce of her ancestral wisdom to protect Lyra and the herd. Her eyes scanned the tundra, seeking a foothold, a sign, anything that could help her move more quickly. The wind howled, bringing with it snowflakes that whipped her face, but she barely felt them. The only thing that mattered was Lyra. Meanwhile, Lyra felt panic tighten its grip on her chest. The ice beneath the horse's hooves not only groaned, it cracked into threatening fissures, dark lines spreading like spider webs beneath the snow. The hill of dwarf pines, her only visible refuge, seemed increasingly distant. The 5 remaining bears had closed the distance, their deep, hungry growls now almost audible above the wind. They moved with frightening coordination, encircling the herd, pushing them towards the area of thinner ice. Lyra knew she was cornered. If the horses fell through the ice, it would be the end of everything. She tightened the reins, pulling the oldest stallion to the right, trying to divert from the imminent danger, but the bears blocked the way. Anya, observing from a distance, saw Lyra's despair and the growing threat of the ice. A silent scream of anguish tore through her soul. She needed to act, and fast. With a superhuman effort, she turned, using her arms to propel her injured body. Every movement was a torture, but she refused to yield. Her gloved fingers felt the icy ground, seeking any irregularity for support. She crawled, inch by inch, towards Lyra, leaving a trail of disturbed snow and blood that stained the immaculate white. The 2 bears she had scared, though still cautious, began to move again, drawn by the scent of blood and the figure dragging herself through the snow. Lyra felt the ground tremble beneath the stallion's hooves. An enormous fissure opened ahead, revealing the dark, icy water below. The horses recoiled, snorting in fear, their eyes wide. The bears took advantage of the hesitation, advancing, their gigantic bodies blocking any escape route. Lyra was trapped between the predators and the icy abyss. Tears froze on her eyelids, but she did not surrender. She looked at the horses, at the stallion that protected her, at the herd that represented the life of her village. A new wave of determination flooded her. She could not fail. Anya, her muscles burning and her knee throbbing, watched the scene unfold. Lyra and the horses were on the verge of collapse, literally. The 2 bears following her were closer now, their growls echoing. She was surrounded by danger, but the sight of Lyra, so young and brave, ignited an even stronger flame in her heart. She needed an even greater distraction, something that would capture the attention of all 7 bears and give them a chance to escape. Her eyes fixed on a small rocky elevation, covered with snow, a few meters from where she was. It was an insane risk, but Yakutia had taught that sometimes the only way out was to defy the impossible. With a final effort, Anya began to drag herself towards the elevation, her body trembling, her soul ablaze, without looking back. Every inch was an agony, a cruel reminder of her fragile flesh against the tundra's mercilessness. The blood staining the snow beneath her was a silent testament to her struggle. The 2 bears, now a few meters away, snorted at her heels, the scent of their warm, heavy breath mingling with the icy air. But Anya felt neither the cold nor the pain, only the urgency of Lyra, the image of her granddaughter trapped between treacherous ice and hungry predators. Lyra, in turn, felt the ground tremble beneath the horses' hooves. The fissures in the ice widened, revealing the abyssal darkness of the freezing water below. Panic was an icy wave that threatened to engulf her, but she clung to the image of her grandmother, a silent and unbreakable force. The 5 remaining bears, with renewed ferocity, pushed the herd to the edge of the abyss. Their growls were a chorus of death, and the horses, their eyes wide with terror, recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. Lyra knew that time was running out, that every second was a thin thread unraveling. With a final desperate push, Anya reached the rocky elevation. It was steeper than it looked, and the effort almost made her faint. She clung to an exposed rock, her gloved fingers seeking purchase. There at the top, the wind howled with even greater fury, and the snow whipped her face. But she had a clear view of the scene. Lyra and the horses are trapped, and the 7 bears, now all visible, converging on the herd. 2 of them were already almost at the base of the elevation where Anya stood, their eyes fixed on her. The other 5, noticing the distraction, began to shift their attention, their heavy steps turning towards the elder. Anya knew this was the moment. She needed an act of desperation, a display of strength that defied logic, that spoke louder than any scream. Her eyes scanned the top of the elevation. There was a large, loose stone, almost a small monolith, precariously balanced on the edge. It was too heavy for her to push with her injured body, but ancestral wisdom whispered an idea. With her good hand, she took the mammoth bone amulet from her belt, not to raise it, but to use it as a tool. With a tremendous effort, she began to dig into the snow and ice around the base of the stone, using the amulet to loosen the debris that held it. The 2 closest bears, confused by her activity, growled but did not advance. The other 5, now at a considerable distance, watched, their heads tilted. Lyra, seeing the bears shift focus, felt a hint of hope. Her grandmother was doing something bold. She could not see what it was, but the predator's distraction was her only chance. With a muffled war cry, she pulled the stallion's reins, propelling him with all her strength towards a small stretch of thicker snow, away from the most dangerous fissure, risking everything. Anya, with sweat freezing on her forehead and her muscles trembling, finally felt the stone give way. With a final push from her good shoulder, she unbalanced it. The giant stone rolled down the slope of the elevation with a deafening crash, breaking the silence of the blizzard. It hit the ground with the force of thunder, kicking up a cloud of snow and ice that spread for tens of meters. The sound, unnatural and powerful, reverberated across the tundra, a cry of the earth itself. All 7 polar bears stopped. Their gigantic bodies froze in place, their heads turned abruptly towards the elevation, their small, dark eyes fixed on Anya. The sound was not of prey, but of a challenge, of a force they did not expect. Curiosity and caution, once again, overcame hunger. They turned completely, their heavy steps now directed towards the elder, a white, furious mass converging on her. Anya, exhausted, but with an unwavering gaze, knew she had achieved the distraction. Now she would face the 7 giants alone in the silent climax of her struggle. Her Yakutian soul, forged in 1,000 winters, was ready. The 7 bears, white and imposing masses, converged on the rocky elevation where Anya leaned. Their growls, once distant, were now a guttural murmur that vibrated in the icy air, promising danger. The elder, her injured knee throbbing and her muscles trembling with exhaustion, could not flee. She could not scream, but she could rise with the dignity of her ancestors. With a monumental effort, she pushed herself up, leaning on the rock, and knelt, the mammoth bone amulet firmly clutched in her good hand. Her eyes, deep and dark as Yakutia's eternal ice, met those of the predators. There was no fear in them, only an iron determination, a silent fury that defied nature itself. Lyra, meanwhile, felt a thread of hope. Her grandmother's distraction had bought precious seconds. With a cry muffled by the wind, she pulled the stallion's reins, propelling him with all her strength towards the small stretch of thicker snow she had spotted. The horse's hooves, once hesitant, now pounded with renewed urgency, moving away from the treacherous fissure. The oldest stallion, sensing the change in the bear's attention, responded with a burst of energy, dragging the herd with him. Lyra looked back at the diminutive figure of her grandmother on the elevation, surrounded by the white forms of the bears. A silent prayer rose from her heart, mixed with overwhelming admiration. The bears closest to Anya stopped, their snouts sniffing the air, their small, curious eyes fixed on the elder. They expected frightened prey, a wounded animal that would cower. Instead, they found a figure who, even on her knees, exuded an inexplicable strength. Anya made no sudden movements. She simply held her gaze, firm, unwavering, like the icy mountains that witnessed her birth. She raised the amulet, not as a weapon, but as a symbol, an invisible shield forged by the history of her people. The gesture was slow, deliberate, laden with centuries of resilience. The more distant bears, who had turned towards her, also hesitated, confused. The scene did not fit their hunting instincts. That prey was not easy, not predictable. The alpha bear, the largest of them all, let out a deep growl, but did not advance. It circled the elevation, its heavy steps kicking up snow, trying to find a weakness, an opening. Anya followed it with her gaze without deviating a millimeter. She knew this was the crucial moment. Yakutia had taught that ancestral wisdom was a more potent weapon than brute force. She projected into her gaze all her history, all her pain, all her overcoming, all the protection she felt for her granddaughter and her people. It was a silent scream that said, "I will not be broken, not today." Lyra, her heart racing, felt the ground beneath the horses' hooves become firmer. They had reached the stretch of thicker snow, away from the imminent danger of cracking ice. The horses, exhausted but safe, snorted, their bodies trembling. She looked back again. The bears were still on the elevation, but now seemed less threatening, more hesitant. And then, one by one, with frustrated growls and lowered heads, they began to move away. First the alpha, then the others, their gigantic silhouettes dissolving into the blizzard, leaving Anya alone on the elevation. A sigh, almost inaudible, escaped Anya's lips. The tension that held her dissolved, and she felt the weight of pain and exhaustion. But she had succeeded. She had driven away the 7 giants. Lyra, seeing the bears disappear into the blizzard, did not wait. She leapt from the stallion, leaving the horses safe, and ran, stumbling through the snow, towards her grandmother. Her eyes were filled with frozen tears, but they were tears of relief and love. She reached Anya, knelt beside her, and hugged her tightly, feeling the elder's fragile body tremble. Anya, unable to speak, squeezed Lyra's hand, her eyes conveying all the love, relief, and the promise that life in Yakutia would always find a way. The herd was saved, Lyra was safe, and the village would survive. Anya's silent scream had been heard. Lyra clutched Anya with all the strength she had left, feeling the fragile warmth of her grandmother's body against her own. The tears, once frozen, now streamed warm down the girl's face, mingling with the melted snow. Anya, unable to utter a sound, returned the embrace with a trembling hand, her eyes brimming with a deep emotion that spoke volumes. Relief was an overwhelming wave, washing away the terror of the blizzard and the bears. They stayed there, kneeling in the snow, for a long moment, just feeling each other's presence, living proof that they had survived. Finally, Lyra pulled back a little, her gaze fixed on Anya's injured knee. The snow around was stained with blood, and the elder's leg seemed to be at a painful angle. "Grandma," Lyra whispered, her voice choked, "we need to go back. The village needs you." Anya nodded, a slow, painful nod. With Lyra's help, who used her own body as support, the elder began to stand. Every movement was an agony, but the determination in her eyes was unwavering. Lyra, with care and patience, helped Anya lean on the oldest stallion, who had returned to her side, as if knowing the need. The animal, with its instinctive wisdom, walked slowly, its steps firm in the deep snow, while Lyra guided it, always attentive to her grandmother. The return to the village was slow and arduous. The blizzard, though still present, had lessened its fury, as if Yakutia, in an act of respect, softened its temperament to allow the heroine's return. The horses, exhausted but safe, followed the stallion, their hooves breaking the ice crust with a monotonous sound. Lyra, though tired, felt a renewed strength. The sight of Anya, wounded but indomitable, was a beacon of hope that propelled her. She knew her grandmother had done the impossible, and this awareness filled her heart with pride and admiration. When the first lights of the village appeared in the twilight darkness, a murmur of relief and surprise spread among the villagers. They had lost hope. The sight of Lyra guiding the herd and supporting Anya made many run to meet them. Cries of joy and tears of relief filled the air, muffling the wind's howl. The strongest men helped Anya dismount, carrying her with utmost care to her yurt. The women, their eyes brimming with tears, enveloped Lyra in tight embraces, thanking the spirits for her safety. In Anya's yurt, the village healers worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging her injured knee. The pain was intense, but Anya uttered no sound, only squeezed Lyra's hand, who sat beside her, her eyes fixed on her grandmother. The village was in silent celebration. The herd, the soul of their survival, was safe. Hunger had been driven away, at least for now, but most importantly, the legend of Anya had been born. In the days that followed, as Anya slowly recovered, the story of her heroism spread like the wind across Yakutia. It was not the story of a scream, but of a silence that had spoken louder than any roar. The mute elder who had confronted 7 giant polar bears with her cunning and courage became a symbol of resilience. The village children looked at her with reverence, and the adults sought her counsel, not in words, but in her firm gestures and in her gaze that carried the wisdom of 1,000 winters. The village prospered, always remembering the grandmother who, even without a voice, raised the most powerful of cries against frozen despair, ensuring life and hope for future generations. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the merciless Yakutian winter gave way to a brief but vibrant spring, followed by a summer of almost constant light. Life in the village, once marked by the constant threat of hunger and cold, now pulsed with renewed energy. The herd of Yakutian horses, saved from the brink of the abyss, multiplied, ensuring not only food, but also a sense of security and continuity that had long been shaken. Anya, though her knee was never the same, regained her strength with the same tenacity with which she had faced the bears. She walked with a slight limp, but her steps were firm, laden with the weight of her wisdom and the lightness of a spirit at peace. The trauma that had silenced her for so many years no longer defined her. Instead of an absence, her muteness became a powerful presence. People saw her not as the elder who had lost her voice, but as one who had found it in her actions, in her eloquent gestures, in her gaze that spoke of 1,000 winters and boundless courage. Lyra, in turn, flourished under the new light. The experience on the tundra had transformed her from a vulnerable girl into a strong young woman conscious of her role. She spent hours beside Anya, learning not only the daily tasks of the village, but also her grandmother's silent language. Over time, Lyra became the interpreter of Anya's gestures, a bridge between ancestral wisdom and the needs of the present. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now shone with the same silent determination she saw in her grandmother's eyes. She herded the horses with a newfound confidence, always attentive to the signs of nature, remembering the lessons learned at the edge of the cracking ice. The story of Anya, the silent scream, became the most precious of narratives told around the campfires, passed from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation. It was not just a story of survival, but a testament to the unwavering strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. The village children, sitting at Anya's feet, watched her gestures as Lyra narrated the epic and learned that true strength lies not only in the voice one possesses, but in the courage to act, in the altruism to protect, in the connection with family and with the land. Anya, sitting in her yurt, watched life flourish around her. The laughter of children, the murmur of conversations, the sound of horses grazing on the tundra, all was music to her soul. She might not hear with her ears, but she felt with her heart the vibrant pulse of her village. Her knee still ached on the coldest days, but the pain was a reminder of her victory, not of her weakness. She had fulfilled her purpose, not with war cries, but with the stillness of a soul that refused to yield. The connection between Anya and Lyra deepened, becoming an unbreakable bond. Lyra not only loved her grandmother, she revered her, seeing in her the embodiment of all that was good and strong in her people. And Anya, watching Lyra grow, knew that the village's future was in good hands. The young woman carried not only Yakutian blood, but also the legacy of resilience, altruism, and a courage that transcended words. In the vast and merciless Yakutia, where winter still froze the soul at 70 degrees, the legend of Anya, the grandmother who, even without a voice, raised the most powerful of cries against frozen despair, would continue to inspire. Her story was a beacon of hope, an eternal reminder that, even in the most extreme conditions, human connection, the strength of family and the spirit of overcoming could move mountains of ice and drive away the most fearsome predators. And so, beneath the vast and starry sky of Yakutia, life found its way, resilient and eternal, guided by the silent echo of a love that saved everyone.